Teen girl's affair with sheriff ends in grisly murder. A true crime shocker. Welcome to Mixed Crime Tales, where today we're diving into a shocking case full of betrayal, power, and tragedy. A sheriff gets involved with a teenage girl, and their affair leads to a pregnancy. What happens next is even darker, a murder that sets off a tragic chain of events. Stick with us as we uncover the disturbing twists in this story and how things spun out of control, ending in deadly violence. Sheriff Paul Carter was well known in Ridgeville, Louisiana. At 46, he had spent over 20 years in law enforcement. People around town saw him as a strong leader, someone they could trust. But behind the uniform, Paul was hiding a big secret. For months, he had been seeing Anna Miller, a 19-year-old waitress at a local diner. To everyone else, Paul seemed like a devoted husband to his wife of 20 years, Grace Carter, who worked as a school teacher. But Grace had her suspicions for a long time. She'd heard the rumors, and though she stayed calm and kept things together for their children and their reputation in the community, the truth was slowly wearing her down. Paul wasn't just unfaithful, he was controlling and sometimes even abusive, which made Grace feel stuck in the marriage. Meanwhile, Anna, young and uncertain, was easy for Paul to manipulate. He made promises about taking care of her and giving her a better life. Anna had just finished high school and had big dreams of going to college, but those dreams faded as Paul pulled her deeper into his world, isolating her from her family and friends. Things took a turn when Anna found out she was pregnant. She felt completely helpless, trapped in a situation she had no control over. Paul, instead of being supportive, was furious when he heard the news. When Anna told Paul she was pregnant, his whole attitude changed. He became cold and distant, completely different from the charming man he'd been when they first started seeing each other. Paul had no interest in having another child, especially one that could ruin his reputation. This love triangle was now a storm of emotions for everyone involved. Anna was scared and had no idea what her future would look like with a baby on the way. Paul, on the other hand, was feeling the weight of his choices and the possible public fallout if people found out. For Grace, Paul's wife, the affair was already a huge blow, but the news of the pregnancy was devastating. After years of putting up with Paul's controlling ways, the idea that her husband might have a child with a woman nearly the same age as their own son, Ben, was unbearable. As the days went by, Paul, who once seemed powerful and in control, began to crack under the pressure. Everyone involved could feel that something was about to happen. On the morning of June 28, 2009, Sheriff Paul Carter was found dead in his home. It was around 8:15 a.m. when his longtime neighbor, Harold Jones, a retired postal worker, noticed something strange. Harold had stepped outside to get his morning paper and saw that Paul's front door was slightly open. This was unusual since Paul was always very particular about security, especially being the sheriff. Concerned, Harold decided to check on him. When he stepped inside, he immediately saw signs of a struggle. The living room was a mess, cushions were tossed around, and a vase was broken on the floor. Harold's heart began to race as he called out Paul's name, but there was no response. He headed toward the master bedroom and froze when he reached the doorway. Paul's body was lying on the floor, lifeless in a pool of blood. He had been shot multiple times, and there was blood spattered all over the walls. The horrifying scene was unlike anything Harold had ever seen. Shaking with fear, Harold backed out of the house and quickly called 911. "There's been a murder," he told the dispatcher, his voice barely steady. Harold's voice was shaky when he made the 911 call, and within minutes, emergency responders were on their way. When the police arrived, they found Harold outside, pale and visibly shaken. He explained what he had seen, and the officers quickly went into the house. What they found was a chaotic and violent scene. It was clear there had been a struggle. Paul had been shot in the head, chest, and genital area, and the attack seemed sudden. His service revolver, the weapon used in the murder, was lying on the floor near his body. Furniture was overturned and shattered glass was scattered around, but nothing had been stolen. This made investigators think it wasn't a random robbery, but a personal attack. Detective Sarah Mason, a 15-year veteran of the Ridgeville Police Department, led the investigation. Known for her no-nonsense approach, she immediately started examining the crime scene. The house was a mess. Furniture was knocked over, glass was broken, and a pool of blood surrounded Paul's body in the master bedroom. Paul had been shot 3 times, once in the head, once in the chest, and once in the genital area. The shots to the head and chest suggested a planned murder, but the shot to the genitals stood out. Detective Mason and her team believed this wasn't just about killing Paul. They thought the shooter aimed at that area on purpose as a sign of anger or revenge, pointing to a deeply personal motive. This wasn't just about ending his life, Mason would later say. It was about sending a message. The fact that Paul's own service revolver was used in the attack suggested the killer knew him well. The investigation team called in for more clues, carefully photographed the blood spatter on the bedroom walls, and gathered evidence from the shattered vase and overturned furniture. There were no signs of forced entry, which made detectives think that Paul probably knew his attacker and had let them into the house willingly. This, along with the shot to his genitals, suggested the crime was driven by strong emotions, perhaps rage, jealousy, or betrayal. By late afternoon, the police had pieced together a rough timeline of events. It seemed Paul was attacked late the night before or early in the morning. The nature of his wounds, the lack of stolen items, and the overall state of the house made it clear. This was not a robbery gone wrong. It was a targeted killing, and the shot to the genitals pointed to a personal or sexual motive. Detective Mason and her team now focused on finding out who had a reason to want Paul dead. As they gathered more evidence, they prepared to question those closest to him, knowing that in a small town like Ridgeville, secrets don't stay hidden for long. Grace Carter, Paul's wife of 20 years, was one of the first people the police questioned. When she sat down with Detective Mason on the evening of June 28, 2009, Grace seemed calm, but her words revealed years of unhappiness and betrayal. Grace admitted that her marriage had been in trouble for a long time. She explained that she had suspected Paul of cheating for years. "I just knew," she told the detective. "There were too many signs." Grace went on to describe how she had found evidence of Paul's affairs in their shared SUV. It started with small things, stray hair clips, and unfamiliar perfumes. Then Grace found a thong under the passenger seat, followed by used condoms hidden in the glove compartment. Each discovery made her worst fears come true. Grace's worst fears were confirmed. Paul had been cheating on her. But it wasn't just rumors anymore. About 4 months before Paul's murder, Grace came home early from her job as a school teacher and walked right into the truth. She opened the door to their living room and saw Paul with Anna Miller, the 19-year-old waitress from the local diner, having sex on their couch. "I couldn't believe it," Grace later told the police. "I just stood there frozen, my husband with a girl young enough to be our daughter." The betrayal was too much for Grace to handle. She immediately confronted Paul, but he brushed it off, saying it wasn't a big deal. "It's just sex," he told her. "It doesn't mean anything." Grace, her voice trembling, recounted to the police, "But it meant everything to me." As if the affair wasn't bad enough, Grace soon discovered that Anna was pregnant with Paul's child. One night, Grace overheard Paul on the phone with Anna, talking about the pregnancy. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her husband wasn't just cheating. He was about to have a child with someone else. Grace had endured so much over the years, but this pushed her to her emotional breaking point. She felt humiliated, angry, and completely betrayed by the man she had once loved. "I just wanted it to be over," she told the police. "My marriage, my life." Despite admitting how deeply hurt she was, Grace stayed calm during the police interrogation. She firmly denied any involvement in Paul's murder, insisting that even though she hated what he had done, she didn't kill him. However, to the police, Grace was a key suspect. Her motive, years of betrayal and anger, was clear. Meanwhile, Anna Miller, the young waitress, had been caught in a complicated and manipulative relationship with Paul. When the police questioned Anna, she described how Paul had promised her a better life, pulling her deeper into his world. Hannah had always dreamed of a better life. Growing up in a small town as the daughter of a felon, she had big dreams but few ways to achieve them. After dropping out of school, she was stuck working late shifts at the local diner, barely getting by, living paycheck to paycheck. Then Paul came into her life and things changed. Anna told the police that Paul had promised her the world. He said he would take care of her, give her everything she wanted, and help her escape her difficult life. Nearly 30 years older than her, Paul convinced Anna that he would buy her a house, support her financially, and even take her on vacations. Once he told her they would go to Dollywood in Tennessee, a dream trip for Anna, who had never left Louisiana before. These promises made Anna feel hopeful about her future, and Paul's power and charisma made it hard for her to see the darker side of their relationship. But things quickly changed when Anna found out she was pregnant. In late April 2009, after weeks of feeling sick and tired, Anna took a pregnancy test. When the result came back positive, she was stunned. She hadn't planned on getting pregnant, especially not with Paul's child. "I didn't know what to do," Anna told the police. "I felt trapped." The pregnancy left Anna feeling torn. On one hand, she hoped Paul would keep his promises and take care of both her and the baby. On the other hand, deep down, she started to realize that Paul had been lying to her. His promises of a life together felt empty, and she feared he would abandon her now that she was pregnant. As the pressure grew, Anna felt more and more isolated, unsure of who to turn to. Her situation became even more complicated when Grace Carter, Paul's wife, confronted her. Anna described the terrifying moment when Grace showed up at her apartment one afternoon holding a steak knife. It was shortly after Grace had found out about the pregnancy. "She knew everything," Anna said. "She told me she was going to roast my baby over an open fire." Mandy recalled that Grace accused her of ruining her marriage and demanded to know if the pregnancy was real. Trembling with fear, Mandy admitted it. "I was scared," she told investigators. Grace was furious, and Mandy had no idea what she might do. Mandy felt overwhelmed with guilt, caught in a love triangle that was spiraling out of control. She told the police that, although she wanted to escape the situation, she never intended for things to turn violent. Mandy's vulnerability and fear made her a suspect, but she insisted she didn't have the strength or anger to kill Paul. Still, her pregnancy and affair put her at the center of the case, and the police saw her as a key figure in uncovering the truth. A major twist came when the police dug deeper into Paul's affair with Anna. During an intense interrogation, Anna broke down and revealed disturbing details about how Paul had been manipulating her for months. The officers were shocked as she described the emotional hold Paul had on her life. It wasn't just promises of a house or vacations that kept her trapped. Paul had taken things much further. Anna explained that her mother, who had a history of drug offenses, was serving time in prison. Paul, using his power as sheriff, had threatened her. He told Anna that if she ever left him or revealed the pregnancy, he would use his influence to make sure the guards tortured her mother in prison. This fear and pressure made Anna feel completely helpless. As the police listened, the full extent of Paul's manipulation became clear. This wasn't just an affair gone wrong, it was an abuse of power that left Anna terrified and trapped. The detectives were disgusted by Paul's actions. One officer later described Paul's behavior as a shocking abuse of trust and authority. But there was more. Anna also revealed that before she became involved with Paul, she had dated his son, Ben Carter. Before Anna got involved with Sheriff Paul, she had been in a relationship with his son, Ben Carter. Their relationship ended just a few months before Anna and Paul started their affair. Ben had no idea that his father had become Anna's new lover. This past relationship added another layer of complexity to the case. Ben, who had been distant from his father for years, had already confronted Paul when he found out about the affair, although at the time, he didn't know Anna was pregnant. This twist in the investigation gave detectives new angles to consider. They began wondering if Ben had played a role in his father's murder or if Anna's actions were driven by fear of Paul's threats. The tangled relationships within the Carter family and Paul's manipulation over Anna left the investigators struggling to piece together a much darker and more complicated puzzle than they had expected. Ben, at 21, was known around town as a troublemaker. Locals described him as a wild card with a reputation for being both promiscuous and quick-tempered. His relationship with Anna had always been rocky. She eventually broke up with Ben because of his constant cheating. Friends of Anna said she had been deeply hurt by Ben's behavior, especially when she discovered he was seeing other women and even a few men behind her back. What made the situation worse was Ben's violent reputation. Though he was quiet around strangers, he had a dark side that came out in his relationships. During a police interrogation, Anna revealed a shocking detail. Ben had physically abused her several times. Tearfully, she confessed that she had been pregnant with Ben's child before they broke up, but Ben had beaten her, causing her to miscarry several times. The police were stunned by these revelations, which added another layer of tragedy to Anna's story. When Ben found out that Anna was pregnant with his father's child, his anger only grew. According to those close to him, Ben felt humiliated and betrayed, not just by Anna, but by his own father. The fact that his father, Paul, had not only stolen his girlfriend, but also gotten her pregnant was too much for him to handle. Friends described Ben as completely shattered and out of control after the news spread. One friend recalled seeing Ben storm out of a local bar after hearing a rumor about Anna's pregnancy, visibly upset and muttering about how he was going to take care of it. During his police interrogation, Ben's anger and frustration were obvious. Officers described his demeanor as volatile, noting that he struggled to keep his emotions in check throughout the questioning. When confronted with the accusations, Ben denied having any involvement in his father's murder. However, his hostility toward both Paul and Anna was clear. Although there was no direct evidence linking Ben to the crime, the police couldn't ignore his rage. His motive was strong. His father had betrayed him in the worst way, and Anna's pregnancy was a constant reminder of that pain. But despite his violent past and the tension between him and Anna, Ben insisted he had nothing to do with the murder. Meanwhile, on the night of June 23, 2009, Grace Carter finally reached her breaking point. After years of suspicion, betrayal, and humiliation, she could no longer tolerate her husband's lies and manipulation. The discovery of Paul's affair with Anna and the fact that Anna was pregnant was the final straw. For months, Grace had been quietly simmering with anger, her frustration building to a boiling point. She felt trapped in her marriage, disgusted by the man she had once loved and overwhelmed by the weight of Paul's infidelity. That night, Grace confronted Paul in their living room. The argument started like many others had, but this time, Grace had a plan. Paul tried to brush off Grace's concerns, dismissing her as paranoid, but this time, she wasn't backing down. With trembling hands and her heart racing, Grace grabbed the gun Paul kept hidden in the closet. In cold, quiet anger, she pointed the weapon at him and fired a single shot, hitting him in the groin. The police later theorized that the location of the wound was no accident. It symbolized Paul's betrayal of their marriage. Paul collapsed to the ground, bleeding heavily, and Grace stood there, watching the man she had spent years with dying at her feet. In that moment, a rush of emotions hit her: relief, guilt, anger, and fear. She felt justified in her actions, believing Paul had deserved it after everything he had put her through. But at the same time, a deep sense of dread crept in. What had she done? Desperate, Grace tried to stage the scene to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. She dragged Paul's body toward the garage, hoping to cover up the truth. But when the detectives arrived, they quickly saw through her attempts. There were inconsistencies in her story, and the forensic evidence pointed directly to Grace as the primary suspect. The gun used in the murder was registered to Paul, and there were no signs of forced entry. Under interrogation, Grace finally broke down and confessed to the crime. The full weight of what she had done sank in as the officers placed her in handcuffs. She had hoped that killing Paul would bring her peace, but instead, it brought nothing but sorrow and the harsh reality of a life behind bars. In January 2011, Grace Carter went to trial for the murder of her husband, Sheriff Paul Carter. The courtroom was packed with family, friends, and curious members of the Ridgeville community. Grace's defense attorney, Lisa Taylor, argued that Grace had been driven to kill Paul after enduring years of emotional abuse and betrayal. They used the cheated wife defense, claiming Grace was a victim of Paul's actions. Grace's defense attorney, Lisa Taylor, argued that Grace was a victim of her husband's infidelity, which ultimately pushed her to her breaking point. Taylor presented evidence of Paul's long affair with 19-year-old Anna, and witnesses testified about the disturbing evidence Grace had found, such as used condoms and women's underwear in their family SUV. Taylor painted a vivid picture of a woman who had been pushed to her limits, arguing that Paul's careless behavior had triggered the tragic confrontation that led to his death. However, prosecutor Richard McDougall had a different story. He argued that Grace acted with premeditation. She had confronted Paul multiple times about his infidelities, and the prosecution wanted to prove that Grace was fully aware of her actions when she shot him. They described the crime scene, emphasizing the brutality of the murder and the emotional toll it had taken on the community. As the trial went on, Grace's family attended every session, hoping for a positive outcome. On the outside, Grace appeared calm, but inside she was filled with anxiety about the possibility of spending years in prison. The community was divided. Some people sympathized with her, while others saw her as nothing more than a murderer. After days of testimony, the jury reached a decision. On January 21, 2011, they returned with a verdict. Grace was found guilty of second-degree murder. The news hit Grace like a punch to the gut. The emotional weight of the trial and the guilty verdict felt overwhelming. Grace had hoped for a lighter sentence, believing that the difficult circumstances of her life would be considered. Instead, she was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Tears streamed down Grace's face as she realized she would be separated from her children for many years. The verdict sent shockwaves through the Carter family, who had been respected in the community for so long. Friends and family felt a mix of relief and heartbreak, unsure of how to process what had happened. The people who knew Grace Carter were struggling to reconcile the woman they knew with the crime she had committed. Her trial and sentencing highlighted the tragic consequences of infidelity and emotional abuse, leaving a lasting impact on everyone involved. After Grace was sentenced to 25 years in prison for the murder of her husband, Sheriff Paul Carter, the lives of everyone involved changed dramatically. Grace was sent to the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women in Street Gabriel, where she faced a harsh new reality. Many of her days were spent in solitude, reflecting on the decisions that led her to such a tragic act. The guilt weighed heavily on her, knowing that her actions had shattered her family and brought pain to the Ridgeville community. Her children were left to navigate their lives without their mother's guidance, while Grace struggled to find purpose behind bars. Meanwhile, the aftermath of the murder trial brought unexpected changes in the lives of Anna Miller and Ben Carter, Paul's son. After the trial, Ben reached out to Anna. They had a complicated history, having dated before Anna's affair with Paul. Ben, known for his promiscuous ways, still had strong feelings for Anna even after everything that had happened. Both of them shared a bond over their troubled pasts, and they were trying to move forward from the chaos that had consumed their lives. In early 2011, just a few months after the trial, Ben and Anna rekindled their relationship. They began seeing each other more often, meeting at local coffee shops and parks in Ridgeville. Slowly but surely, they found comfort in one another. Ben, who had a reputation for being violent in the past, started showing signs of change. He began attending therapy sessions to work on his anger issues and focus on becoming a better person. He also tried to be a more supportive partner to Anna. By the summer of 2012, Ben and Anna decided to take their relationship further. Ben and Anna decided to take their relationship to the next level. They announced their engagement during a small family gathering, surprising many of those around them. Later that year, the couple married in a modest ceremony at a local park, surrounded by close friends and family. For them, it was a chance to build a new life together, free from the shadows of their troubled past. As for Grace, her time in prison was defined by her struggle for redemption. She participated in therapy programs and worked hard to reconnect with her children during their visits. Despite the devastating consequences of her actions, she hoped that one day she could regain their trust and become part of their lives again. The stories of Grace, Anna, and Ben illustrate the complex nature of love, betrayal, and the consequences of choices made in moments of despair. Each of them was trying to rebuild their lives in the wake of a tragedy that had forever changed them. A sheriff, a scandal, and a murder. Paul Carter's story serves as a stark reminder that when power is misused, it can lead to devastating consequences. This has been Metro Crime Tales.